Hello, everyone. This is Albert Espinoza, and this is week 2 of our MPA 545 Conflict Resolution and Labor Negotiation course for Professor James Curtis at CBU. And in this week's multimedia presentation, I will identify 4 concepts from our course book, the authors within the section of the book that correlate to this concept, the journals referenced within our book, and I will also tie theorists that correlate with the journal. So with that, I'll get started. The first concept I'll be talking about is transformational theory, found in chapter 1, page 9 of our book. And the author that caught my attention was Louis A. Kosser, who wrote a journal called Social Conflict and the Theory of Social Change. And within our book, it discusses conflict not only generates new norms and new institutions, but it may also stimulate directly in the economic and technology realm. So as I dove into the journal, it was interesting to read how the struggles between the working class and the capitalists, especially when it came to unions, pushed for changes in technology and research in order to compensate for the increase in pay for the workers. So this was an interesting concept, how research and development, because of pressure by the workers, stimulated new research and technology to improve on things. Made me think about, for example, here in California, where we have environmental mandates, and it's pushed our economy and technology to come up with new industries for the vehicles, such as Tesla, and creating new electric cars. So that's something that caught my eye about this journal. Other things that were interesting as I kept reading, it took a jab at scientific management, where it talked about rigid systems suppressing conflict would exert pressures and emerge in radical ideas and potentially violent conflicts. So trying to do a one-way approach to conflict does not work, and we need to be more flexible and elastic when it comes to conflict in order to create new ideas and thoughts. And conflict and struggle does provide and drive societal change and influences new ideas. Also within the article, it discusses Karl Marx, and it touched on some of his ideas and theories that conflict not only leads to ever-changing relations within, say, the workplace, but also within societal structure. And that's a good thing because it leads to transformational conflict. And we're kind of seeing that right now in our society. So this was a great concept that caught my attention. The second concept that caught my attention was intergroup conflicts, found in chapter 2, page 21 of our course book. That caught my eye because working at the Public Works Department at the City of Rancho Cucamonga, I see this happen between two of the divisions, between our streets and parks. So diving a little bit more into the book, 2 authors that caught my eye were Samuel S. Comarita and C. William Lapworth, and their journal titled Cooperative Choice Among Individuals versus Groups in an In-Person Dilemma Situation touched on a study that suggested more conflicts occur between groups than with actual individuals. So diving in more into their journal, they used an example of how it's easier for 10 members of the U.S. Senate to reach an agreement on a legislative bill as opposed to 100 senators who have more ideas, more thoughts. And so bringing in a larger group into smaller parts or coalitions can assist in reducing some of the conflict by breaking them into smaller groups. One thing you need to be mindful of is it could potentially create some competition, maybe in groups and out groups, and this could potentially arouse a win-lose dynamic between the different subgroups that were broken down. This concept reminded me of Woodrow Wilson and how much of a challenge in his study of administration, and how much of a challenge it is trying to please so many people. How he talks about the hardest thing in government is to make progress because you have to deal with so many people, so many opinions. You have to persuade such a public opinion. He called that a multitudinous monarch as opposed to a single person such as a king. So again, that goes back to our founding fathers, and we're not just about one person making a decision. It's about everyone's ideas and thoughts. So it took me back to Woodrow Wilson, and how public opinion is a challenge to make progress. The third concept that caught my attention was a comparison of conflict styles found in Chapter 2, page 27 of our course book. The two authors within that section are Eleanor Phillips and Rick Cheston. Their journal titled Conflict Resolution, What Works was quite interesting because that section talks about which conflict style works best. Avoidance, forcing, accommodating and compromising, or problem solving. So as I dove into their journal, they talked about these, and one thing that jumped out right off the bat was they did mention there's no one way or method of conflict resolution. So the scientific management approach of doing it the one best way does not work. With the different styles, you think about the tough guy approach, which they call forcing, and it may be necessary during a conflict point where you're firing someone. So at that point, maybe taking that forceful approach makes sense. Avoidance is another option, and it may make sense because you're postponing the confrontation and conflict, while at the same time you're preparing some sort of tactic. Maybe you're doing triangulation, trying to win over someone else to support your cause. So that might be a tactic you're trying to do. It could be compromise and accommodation, where everyone's coming together for the benefit of maybe the entire organization to maybe solve a problem. And so, again, there's no one way or best way to solve a conflict, which took me back to Mary Parker Follett and in the Giving of Orders, where she talks about, it depends on the situation, and it's always evolving, and things we have to know about when any orders are going to be given out is you have to know what the situation is, and that the situation is always evolving, and that when giving any orders, you shouldn't involve a one linear approach to things. It should be flexible and evolving and circular. So this concept of different styles tied in for me with Mary Parker Follett's of Giving of Orders, that hey, there's no one way of doing things, and it depends on the situation on how you're going to approach conflict or how you're going to approach giving orders. The final concept that caught my attention was factors that promote mutual gains in negotiation, found in Chapter 3, page 48 of our book. The authors within that section are Deborah L. Shapiro, Blair H. Shepard, and Lisa Cheriskin. Their journal, titled Business on a Handshake, goes into the details of the 3 levels of trust that are needed in order for success. The 3 levels are deterrence, knowledge, and identification, where deterrence is based on fear, and it's the most fragile since one violation or inconsistency can destroy that fragile beginning relationship. Next is knowledge-based trust, where it's the most common in most organizations, and it lets us predict behavior. And so the better we know someone, the more we can predict their actions. And if there is one inconsistency or one mistake, this level of trust allows for forgiveness and people can move forward, because everyone makes mistakes and forgiveness is important in any good relationship. The final level of trust is identification, where there's an emotional connection, a friendship between people, and this is the highest level of trust. And this process is important because the development of trust takes time, and that creation, that condition of trust is important because it has to start somewhere, which is at the deterrence base level. And this took me back to Chester Bernard and in 510 of informal organizations and their relationships to formal organizations, where the possibility of accepting a common purpose, of communicating and attaining a state of mind under where there's willingness to cooperate requires prior contact and preliminary interaction, so you can build that trust. So these 3 factors of deterrence-based, knowledge-based, identification-based trust correlate a little bit with informal organization because you need that start in order to create that formal organization. Here are the references that I used for my presentation. I'll keep an eye out for your comments, and I look forward to seeing your videos. You have a great one, and God bless. Bye.